The Dynasty portion of our audience, you guys have been ignored for too long. So today we're going to go through an in-depth Dynasty trade targets by position, going over kind of trade strategy with each of these positions, what to do if you're a rebuilder at each position, what to do if you're a contender at each position. Everything under the sun will be covered for Dynasty trade strategy and trade targets in today's video. Of course, we will just have a lot more Dynasty content coming out now that the redraft season is kind of starting to wind down a little bit. So rest assured, to our Dynasty folks, we absolutely will have you covered, and apologies for the neglect that we've given you guys the last couple of weeks. So let's start with the running back position. We're going to go through each position group. I'm going to talk about some kind of like rebuilding trade targets, some contending trade targets, some sells, some buys, as well as kind of the general trade strategy around each of these positions to give you guys a refresher on how you want to handle it going into the stretch run. I do believe this is the best time of the year to have this conversation, because if your league does have a trade deadline, it's probably this week or maybe last week. I typically don't play in leagues with trade deadlines for Dynasty because I think the arms race, even in like week 16, week 17, is very, very important for the Dynasty landscape. But for rebuilders / one-year punts, the running back position is a very tricky situation, because when you're buying running backs as a rebuilder or as a one-year punt type of team, typically you want to be the one selling running back production, because you are ideally trying to tank your own draft pick, get a high draft pick, and add your running backs via the rookie class. But sometimes it does present itself opportunities to buy low on running backs, and you want to definitely take advantage of those. But generally speaking, the overall stance you should be taking as a rebuilding Dynasty team is that you're not buying running backs. But I'm still going to give you some good trade targets anyways. For rebuilders and one-year punts, these are the criteria you want to look for, and a lot of these guys on this list fit all three. If you are a rebuilder, a one-year punt, ideally you're only buying running backs that are younger than 25 years old, multiple years of a projectable workload, so they're on their rookie contract, maybe they have high draft capital, so we know the team investment is there, maybe they signed a second contract and they're, tethered to whatever team that they are with for a number of years. And third, the team is unlikely to invest in more running backs in an ideal world. Now, that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes you have to undergo some risk in this department, but in an ideal world, you got young running backs with multiple years of projectable workloads, and the team is unlikely to use a high investment on a running back. Now, that usually means that those guys are going to accumulate in value, but let's kind of dive into things. So we're going to go through some like soft buys and hard buys, and of course, this is based on our new Dynasty trade value chart, which is live right now on flockfantasy.com, which you can get access to by going to the link in the pinned comment. Promo code FSE gets you 7 days for free, 30% off any of the packages, 6 months for free when you sign up annually, and of course, if you sign up for an annual Mother Flocker package using code FSE, I or Danny can break down your Dynasty teams and give you guys the best advice we can on a personal level. So the Dynasty running back landscape that I think is good for buying rebuild one-year punt type of guys typically is going to come at the top of the board, because the only running backs that we have at the top of the board are young, high upside guys with multiple years of projectable workloads. Breece Hall and Devon Achane fit the description there. They're good just in general, I think, for contenders or rebuilders, but for rebuilders specifically, their value has kind of taken a little bit of a stock down because Devon Achane's offense hasn't performed like we thought it was. Breece Hall offense, I mean, what do we say about the New York Jets? They've been a complete mess, but I still feel very confident in both of these players for multiple years. There's a lot of high team investment there in those guys, so I feel really good about them. So if you're a one-year punt rebuilder and you want to go all the way up for one of these top guys, I don't blame you, although I will say we have a very good running back class coming in, so maybe you want to save your draft picks and so on and so forth. But the other guys that I think are kind of just value accumulators is how I would put them: Isaiah Pacheco, Travis Etienne, Trey Benson, Jalen Wright, and Keaton Mitchell. These guys all have different facets and factors working in or against their favor. With Isaiah Pacheco, he's been hurt all year, and a lot of people would maybe say he's a contending running back buy as opposed to a one-year punt or rebuilding running back buy. But the reason I actually like him as a rebuilding or a one-year punt buy is because he has one more year under contract as the Kansas City Chiefs lead running back, and I actually think it's very possible that they extend Isaiah Pacheco because he's been very good when he's gotten opportunities. He probably would have had a monster breakout season this year, potential first-team All-Pro type of season, in my opinion, the way that the Chiefs have operated their offense, the way that they're using Kareem Hunt. Isaiah Pacheco would have crushed this year, so for me, I think he's just a good buy right now. Maybe not for contenders, just because I don't know how productive and effective he'll be coming off of the injury, but going forward into next year, I think Pacheco is going to be a really, really good option. The only risk he has is that they add running backs in the draft, but honestly, I think they're really committed to Isaiah Pacheco to the point that they might extend him. Travis Etienne is a very similar case. He's not giving you good production right now. He is actually the only running back I have listed here as a hard buy, and the reason for that is because he was a first-round pick. He was very productive. He's having a poor season. Everybody can recognize with their own two eyes that Travis Etienne just doesn't look good this year, and when I look at what is going to happen going forward for the Jaguars, even if Etienne and Bigsby next year are in a two-way timeshare, it's a Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet type of situation, I still believe that Etienne is the guy that they're going to want to be their lead running back. Now, it's a little challenging because it's going to be probably a new coaching staff coming in, but Etienne has that connection with the quarterback. He went to college with him. I do think he still, profiles as the best running back on this team. So I think going out and buying him for the price tag that you're going to have to pay for him right now, which is like basement level price tags for Etienne, mid-second round pick, he's still got his fifth-year option, then he has a chance to go into free agency. I still believe the vibes around Etienne are such that you can get him for a good discount. So whether you're a rebuilder, a contender, a one-year punt, I think he's just universally a pretty solid buy for value accumulation across the board, because it was just 3-4 months ago that we were talking about this guy as a top 6 to 7 dynasty running back, and now all of a sudden one bad season and we're ready to just throw him to the wolves. He's absolutely terrible. Now, things have changed. We're not take locking this, but I do think he has a chance to accumulate some value. Trey Benson, Jalen Wright, and Keaton Mitchell. I talked about Trey Benson in the midseason edition of this video, so I'll keep this brief. Trey Benson is the type of running back buy that this time of year, this is like the literal perfect time to strike on Trey Benson, because James Conner never finished a full season. Trey Benson starting to trend upward in terms of a workload, in terms of his usage. I would be very, very shocked if this is not the absolute cheapest you can buy Trey Benson this current moment, this current week. So if you guys are a rebuilding team and you have 4 second-round picks or something like that, fire a mid-second rounder out there for Trey Benson and see if it can get it done, because I really do think this is a low investment, high upside type of guy. He was my RB1 in the 2024 class. I do not believe James Conner will be long for that situation, not necessarily that he'll be gone next year, but I do think it will be Trey Benson's backfield very, very soon. So definitely go and send some offers for him. And then Jalen Wright, Keaton Mitchell are both just explosive young running backs. Jalen Wright was very, very raw coming into the NFL, so it doesn't shock me that we haven't seen a whole lot of usage with Raheem Mostert, a veteran presence there, with Devon Achane, of course, very efficient and probably one of the best workhorse backs in the league. I think with Jalen Wright at RB44, where I have him ranked, and he is like well after that on Keep Trade Cut, you're getting a guy who at the very least will be a high upside handcuff to Devon Achane going forward, and I do think he can take over the kind of pseudo Raheem Mostert role into the future. And right now, because he hasn't proven a whole lot, people are kind of writing him off as somebody that maybe just isn't a hit in the NFL. And I think because he was so young, because he was so raw, this is kind of what I expected. So if you can send early to mid third round pick for him, I do really feel like that should be enough to get it done potentially, and I would definitely go and send some offers for him. And Keaton Mitchell is just coming off of an injury, so he's obviously not going to look nearly as good, and he's a slow ramp up and all that kind of stuff, but 8.1 yards per carry as a rookie was extremely efficient, so send a third rounder for him as well if you can. So those are kind of like my running back rebuild buys, but again, keep in mind that when you are buying running backs, you probably don't want to do it unless you're at least a one-year punt, house money type of team, or you're an actual true contender. So speaking of running back pushes for contenders, now this running back buy window for contending teams can be the most dangerous thing in all of Dynasty Fantasy Football, because it is so tempting to take your 2025 projected late first round pick and fire it at Derrick Henry, or fire it at whatever running back that you think is going to push you over the edge. And while that can work out for you if you win a championship and all's hunky-dory in that situation, here's the criteria for buying running backs for contenders. When possible, try not to use first-round capital. And I say that because first-round draft picks, when it comes to running backs, are usually the types of picks you can re-roll into future rookie studs, like what we're going to have coming up in the 2025 class. So yes, Derrick Henry or Joe Mixon or whatever running back you're looking to just send out a first-round pick for right now might end up being worth it. But if you hit on Quinshon Judkins or Amarian Hampton or Ollie Gordon or Travion Henderson at the late first round, those guys are going to skyrocket all the way to the top of the running back landscape, and I think it's better to go cheap at this position if possible. So again, similar criteria for buying running backs for rebuilders is that you ideally want multiple years of a projectable workload. You don't want to just buy a guy for the next 5 weeks and that's it. Like, obviously if he helps you win a championship, that's great. But if he is useless after this season is over, then that's not ideal. So you don't want to be sending out offers for guys who are like currently handcuffs, who are working in 2 full workloads or whatever the case is. A guy that I would think is a good example of this would be like Aaron Jones or Alvin Kamara or James Conner, where next year I don't really know how much we can really rely on guys like that. Kamara just got an extension, so maybe he's a little bit different, but Aaron Jones specifically is somebody that I would say don't like just fire at a 1 for, because you need projectable volume at the running back position. And here's the most important part. Whatever you give up, because this is going to happen. When you're trading for a competitive asset, a productive asset, you're probably going to look back a year from now and think you lost the trade more often than not, unless you just got an absolute steal. Somebody gave you Alvin Kamara for a late second round pick. That's probably not going to happen in a lot of people's leagues. Be sure that whatever value you are going to lose in the long term is production gained. So if you're sending away an early second round pick for a running back at this time of season, you should be getting RB1 production. If you're not getting RB1 production for a early second round pick, then in my opinion, that's not a trade worth doing. If you're sending away a late first round pick, you better be getting top 6 to 8 running back production from an older running back, assuming that's what you're buying. Obviously, you could just go up and buy a young running back as well. If you're giving away a mid second round pick, it should probably be high end RB2 production, so on and so forth. You don't want to be giving up the type of asset or the type of player, the type of draft capital that would indicate that you overpaid for that production. If you're going after Ramondre Stevenson, for example, who's like a low-end RB2, mid-end RB2, giving up an early second rounder or a low first rounder even would be an overpay, because that production is not needle-moving production for your fantasy lineup. Whereas if you gave up, let's say, your projected 110 to 112 for Joe Mixon, and maybe he even gives you like a third-round pick on top of Joe Mixon back, that's a little bit more stomachable, because at least Joe Mixon is giving you top 6 to 8 running back production right now, and actually probably has one more year left in the tank after this season is done. So those deals make more sense. Make sure the production gained outweighs the value lost at this position. So running back buys, always an important topic. That's why I kind of went in depth on this part. As far as the actual running backs themselves that I'm buying, you guys can see some of the buys that I have on this list here. Some of them are going to be, risky buys. Some of them are more just kind of easy projectable volume buys, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to go through these guys one by one because they're all kind of in different situations. James Cook to me is a premier running back buy for the rest of the season. He's on bye, like off week this week, but going forward, I feel comfortable projecting his volume. I feel comfortable that next year he'll be a 3rd or a 4th round redraft pick, so you don't really have to worry about him losing a ton of value, which is why if you're going to send, let's say, a late first rounder, I would rather do it for James Cook than I would for like Joe Mixon or Derrick Henry, even if the production you get from Joe Mixon or Derrick Henry is a little bit better, because like I just talked about, you're probably going to look back a year from now and be like, okay, that 111 that I gave away for James Cook was actually a lot more worth it than if I just gave it away for Joe Mixon or Derrick Henry, because at least James Cook is still a very good projection for me. Same goes for Brian Robinson. Again, you wouldn't have to pay a 1 for him, probably an early second. But I think going forward, given how good Jane Daniels is, and I think that Brian Robinson will be the lead back here, maybe they add somebody in the draft, but for the most part, I think Brian Robinson will have a high-end projection again next year, which is why I think he's a pretty decent buy for running back needy teams right now. The 2 risky guys, or 3 risky guys that I want to talk about, Chase Brown, J.K. Dobbins, Tyrone Tracy. In my opinion, these 3 dudes, very, very good production right now. Chase Brown, excellent season he's having so far. J.K. Dobbins, great season he's having so far. Tyrone Tracy, great season he's having so far. All of these guys are hovering around the 24 to 25-year-old range. This running back class that's coming in is very, very good. I do not know if Chase Brown this time next year is a lead back for the Bengals. I do not know if Tyrone Tracy this time next year is a lead back for the Giants. I don't know if J.K. Dobbins the lead back of the Chargers. I'd be willing to bet that maybe one of these guys keeps their job going forward, but that is the major risk with buying these players, which is why an early to mid-second rounder is all I could pay for them. If I knew next year that Chase Brown was going to have the exact role he has now, he would probably be worth a mid to late first, and he'd be a top 8 dynasty running back. But the only problem is, because he was a day 3 pick, don't have a big contract, and the same is true for these other guys too. Dobbins, small contract. Tyrone Tracy, day 3 pick as well. there's absolutely no incentive for the Bengals, the Giants, or the Chargers to not add running backs to this backfield and who can maybe replace these guys. I think all three of them are very talented players. Chase Brown absolutely is a talented enough player to fend off a day 3 rookie running back that the Bengals might draft to help, lead him to be a complement. J.K. Dobbins, a good enough player if he gets re-signed by the Chargers or maybe signs with a new team to be able to fend off another running back. But the value accumulation potential is very volatile, because if a running back gets added, that's going to nuke their value at least to a decent degree. So again, be careful buying players like this. Although if you're a risk taker and you're willing to do it and you have a bunch of second round picks in the bank and you want to fire out, let's say the projected 204 for Chase Brown, or maybe the projected 204 plus like a mid to late third is what you have to give up, I think that would be totally fine to do. Just keep in mind, don't give up ones for these guys. Do not give up first-round picks for these guys, because you have to be concerned that they might get replaced in the offseason. Whereas DeAndre Swift and Rachaad White are a little bit safer, because at least Rachaad White was a day 2 pick. I think even if him and Bucky Irving are going to split the backfield going forward, like into next season, I'm pretty sure that's what's going to happen. I still expect Rachaad White to be the lead back of the two of them, get more of the work, more of the goal line work, more of the receiving work. And then with DeAndre Swift, he's on a big contract to the point that maybe Roschon Johnson is more involved going forward, or whatever the case is, they add a running back in the draft. DeAndre Swift at least has the contract that would dictate he should still be the lead back there. So if you're going to look for a running back buy, I like shooting for like running backs that are in their prime, maybe tethered with good contracts. Maybe you have to take a little bit of risk, like I said, with Chase Brown, with J.K. Dobbins and Tyrone Tracy, but I'm usually not the type of person to go out and fire for like a straight up short-term play like Aaron Jones, or a straight up short-term play like James Conner, because if you give up the 208 for James Conner, giving up the 205 or the 204 for Chase Brown, who actually has the potential to accumulate value just with a little bit more risk, to me, it's a much better return on investment if it goes your way in that type of deal. So that's kind of just like a micro difference between how I like to trade versus maybe how you guys like to trade. Of course, if you're a contending team and you want to fire out the projected 210 for Aaron Jones, go nuts. Like, I think it's definitely worthwhile to do that if you end up winning or if it pushes you to a championship. This is just personally the territory of running backs that I like to buy, because some of them are pretty safe options as far as their workload going into next year, and some of them are, value accumulator potential if things break their way. But just keep in mind, you don't want to take super unnecessary risks here, knowing that we have a good running back class coming up. So that's kind of how I feel about these running backs. But if you're contending and you need production, I think this is a good list of guys to go after. When you're talking about shops or sells, I like to use the word shop sometimes, because sometimes when I use the word sell, everybody just thinks I hate the player. But sometimes I just mean shop. Like, see what he's worth on your open market. Can you get what Keep Trade Cut thinks you can get, or can you get what the open market that I'm using kind of suggests that you can get? When you're shopping players as contenders, this can be a very difficult thing to do, because when you're a contender, you probably don't want to give away running back production. You probably need that to try and win. Ideally, you want to just keep those players, but sometimes you shop them because their market value is too high. You look at the player that you have, and David Montgomery is a guy that's on this list here. David Montgomery is giving you high-end RB2 production. He's valued right now as RB13 on Keep Trade Cut. That's a little bit too high for the type of production, the age, and situation that we have with David Montgomery. So shopping David Montgomery at that price tag for somebody similarly valued who's a little bit younger, or maybe can give you more production or something like that, makes sense. So when you're shopping or selling contending running backs, ideally you either A, can handle losing that running back. Maybe you can just shop or sell a David Montgomery or a Derrick Henry or a Javonte Williams type for a different position. Maybe you need a tight end, or you need a wide receiver, or you need a quarterback or something like that. That's fine, because you have a lot of running backs. You can handle losing that. Or B, if you're getting a running back in return, you can use that running back to maybe extend your winning window. So you maybe sell off David Montgomery for somebody 2 years younger, or maybe you sell off Derrick Henry for Josh Jacobs or Joe Mixon, who maybe project for a little bit longer of a period of time of RB1 production. You sacrifice 1 to 2 points per game, or 2 to 3 points per game, and you're able to extend your winning window. That also makes sense as well. So all of these contending shops and contending sells at running back, they're only like dependent on what you can get for them on the open market. If you sell Derrick Henry and he's worth RB18, like I have him ranked on your open market, then that's fine. You just keep that production. You keep on your merry way. But Keep Trade Cut suggests he's ranked RB10 right now. So if you can sell him for RB10 prices, then I do think it's worth, exploring on your open market and shopping him on your open market. And it's also possible that if he's worth RB10 on your open market, you can use him to tier up, maybe to a contending player like Christian McCaffrey or like Saquon Barkley or like Kenneth Walker or something like that. That is also something that you could potentially do. So again, I'm not going to go super in depth of why Derrick Henry, David Montgomery, Javonte Williams are sells, but Derrick Henry is 30 years old or almost 31 years old. So it's worthwhile because he's producing at a high level that we know this with older running backs. The second he's not producing at a high level, there's a chance that he loses a lot of value. So maybe shop him for somebody a little bit younger, giving you similar production. Same goes with David Montgomery. I think he's a pretty relatively safe asset in the mid RB2 range of dynasty running backs. But at the same time, if you can use him to tier up, you should definitely do that. And then Javonte Williams, I just don't think is very good and going to get a whole lot more of a workload chance. At one point in time, love Javonte Williams, just not looking good at this point in time. So I'm probably just going to be selling on the basis that I think he's going to lose his job going forward. And I don't know if we're going to have much more time of him being a starting running back. And then when you're shopping, selling, / cashing out as rebuilders, it's really simple. The reason you're doing this as a rebuilder, and these are the names I have listed here, it really could be anybody that you're looking to get off of your team who's maybe producing right now, because again, when you're a rebuilding team with the running back position, you're ideally looking to move production off of your team. You're ideally looking to tank your own draft picks. So as a rebuilder, your primary focus is collecting draft picks to help rebuild your team. So even though these players, Bucky Irving, Tank Bigsby, Braylon Allen, and Blake Corum, are all under 24 years old, I do think that they're all worth shopping on your open market because they come with risk. We have a very, very good running back class coming in. Who's to say the Buccaneers don't draft another running back? Who's to say the Jaguars don't draft another running back? The Jets maybe draft another running back. Regardless, there's all these individual cases, and all four of these guys too. I think the starter ahead of them is going to continue being the starter ahead of them, so that's why they're kind of sells for me as well. If you can cash out on Bucky Irving right now for an early second-round pick, I think you should do it. If you can cash out on Tank Bigsby right now for an early to mid-second-round pick, I think you should do it. That's kind of what it comes down to here, because as a rebuilder, re-rolling that asset into an early to mid-second or a mid to late second, depending on the player, is just worth more because you can hit bigger on an early to mid second, in my opinion, than you can hit on Bucky Irving or than you can hit on Tank Bigsby, because that asset could be anything, right? It's the mystery box meme when you have a draft pick versus an actual player. So that's kind of the theory of selling running backs when you're a rebuilder. I'm sure a lot of you guys know that you should be cashing out running back production for draft capital, but I'm just giving you guys some ideas and some players that I think who are good players. I like Bucky Irving. I like Tank Bigsby. I like Braylon Allen, Blake Corum as well. But I do think they're maybe worth cashing out if you can re-roll them into early to potentially mid or even late second-round picks, depending on the player on that list. Let's move into the wide receiver position. And again, the running back position is always the one that comes with a whole lot of nuance. The wide receivers are a lot more cut and dry. When you're rebuilding, you're looking for guys who are either injured or can accumulate value, or they're young players, or whatever the case is. And that's the same as if you're like a one-year punt or whatever. These players, specifically the ones on this list, are not as productive as they could be, or not as productive as I expect them to be in the future. So that's why I'm buying them at this point in time, especially when you're in a one-year punt. Buying on a rebuilding, injured player makes a whole lot of sense, because next year when they're not injured, you're going to use that production to potentially compete. And instead of buying those pieces in the offseason, January, February, March, whatever, or leading up to next season when you have to pay a premium for them and you have more information, you can get a bit of a jump start on these players. And the reactivity of being that we're in season right now can play into your favor. So, for example, Brian Thomas Jr. and the Jacksonville Jaguars look like a train wreck right now. But in March, if they hire Ben Johnson and Trevor Lawrence is back from injury, Brian Thomas Jr. is going to go up in value, which is why I think he's a good buy right now. Same goes for Christian Kirk. Just, separated his shoulder or had shoulder surgery or whatever. By June, he's probably going to be a guy that we're still drafting pretty highly in best ball drafts, and he's going to cost more at that point in time. Brandon Ayuk, he's injured right now as well. He's coming off of a torn ACL next year. Again, we know that the reactivity of a torn ACL is going to decrease a player's value, because we know coming off of the ACL, there's usually complications. There's usually less production. 70-80% of your previous production is what you usually have coming off of torn ACLs. So for me, if I'm a long-term rebuilder, a one-year punt or whatever,
I know when healthy, Brandon Ayuk's one of the best receivers in the league, one of the biggest contracts at wide receiver in the league. So I'm buying low on a guy that I think can accumulate value. And then when it comes to some of these other guys, Jalen McMillan, Troy Franklin, Malik Washington, Marquise Brown, these are all value accumulators as well. Jalen McMillan, I just think is a very good player. I think he's going to have a nice back half of the season. So that's why I'm buying. Troy Franklin, also 21-year-old player coming into the NFL. I think it was a steep learning curve for him, and I like what his quarterback's doing, and they have a connection going back to college. So that's why I'm buying low on him. And then Malik Washington, I liked what I've seen from him in, spurts, in short, order that we've seen of him in the NFL. He's got an aging wide receiver in his core with Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle's not playing very well. I think he could have a chance to close out the season strong, have some good peripherals, and maybe be a buy in the offseason. And then Marquise Brown, also one of these injured players, I just think is a good receiver who can accumulate value going forward. So all these like rebuilding 1-year punt buys, it's simply you're buying a player who you think will be more valuable, let's say a year from now or 6 months from now or 18 months from now, and that's why you're going after them. And then the wide receiver contending buys is obviously similar to buying running backs. You're looking to win this year. You're looking to buy production. And again, you're looking to pay for production, but try not to exceed the value that you're paying for the production that you're getting. So paying a late first-round pick for a guy that's going to give you wide receiver 3 production is probably not a good idea. What you should be doing is ideally you get multiple years of a solid projection, like we said for the running back position. Definitely factor in their current performance, their strength of schedule. Are they a buy like in redraft formats right now? That stuff will factor in, but ultimately you're looking to buy production. So if you're buying production and you're ideally giving up something that is equal to that production, try not to overpay for these players, which is why we have the Dynasty trade value chart in the first place, so you know how much these guys should be worth. Drake London, obviously multiple years of production. He's a high-end receiver in Dynasty in general, but he's like a soft buy right now because he hasn't really performed at a super, super high level. We feel good about his multi-year projection because he's got Kirk Cousins there. He's got Michael Penix there. He's been producing at a high level, but because he's coming off of some bad weeks and so on and so forth, he's kind of like a redraft buy that trickles into Dynasty. So that's why I'm overall buying Drake London. Keep Trade Cut had him ranked like a tier below the Garrett Wilsons and the Puka Nakuas of the world. And to me, he's actually the head of that tier and in the same tier at the very least as those guys. So that's why he's like a slight buy right now. T. Higgins, again, giving you great production. People like to hate on T. Higgins because he's injury prone. Whatever the case is, he's producing and out targeting Jamar Chase in healthy games this year. And he's been producing basically like Justin Jefferson level fantasy production when he's been on the field. So that's why I'm buying him. And again, we know in the offseason, maybe he goes to a new team. He's the number 1 receiver, so on and so forth. Devontae Adams and Calvin Ridley are both like aging wide receivers, but I still feel good and confident that Calvin Ridley, I mean, he's got a multi-year contract for the Titans. Devontae Adams is still a very good receiver. I think even if you're buying them this year for their late season production upside, you're still getting a guy that can be valuable next year. And specifically for Ridley, he has like an excellent schedule, and that's partially why I'm buying him in like both formats, redraft and Dynasty. And then Deontay Johnson is kind of like, his value can't be any worse right now for how he's acclimated to being a Baltimore Raven. And I think his snaps and his targets and all that kind of stuff will start to trend up in the coming weeks, and that's why I'm kind of just buying low on him, but he's not really a super, super high priority buy to begin with. Getting into the wide receiver sells, most of these are just kind of risk mitigation. There's not a whole lot of wide receivers that I found on the Keep Trade Cut open market that I just thought were like absolutely got to sell these guys. I think generally the position was pretty well valued. Most of the guys that weren't buys were at least like holds. Like the tiers were pretty well set up. So if you're selling a wide receiver, it's usually for one reason and one reason alone. The player is overvalued on the market based on either how much production they're giving you or maybe their range of outcomes as far as how high they can climb on the open market. In your mind, the market is thinking too much about upside rather than downside. And that's kind of like what I think of all of these players, where Rashee Rice, the reason that he's like wide receiver 14 on Keep Trade Cut right now is because everybody is focused on the upside that he's a top 10 receiver on Keep Trade Cut a year from now, which is very possible, right? He was producing at a super high level with Patrick Mahomes, but he also has a major injury that he's coming off of next year. He has an impending suspension that we have to look at. He's also kind of a knucklehead. Maybe he does something else stupid in the offseason. I think nobody's really thinking about the downside of Rashee Rice, so that's why I have him as 22, because that's factoring in that downside. And then Jalen Waddle, same thing. everybody's thinking of, okay, well, what if he just gets back to Jalen Waddle of old? And I'm thinking, okay, like maybe he's just like super, super banged up right now, and we're not going to see him be the same player. We see these guys, pop up year 1 to 3 all the time and then start to taper off as their career goes along. Shit happens quick in the NFL. And for me, I don't see any tangible reason why Jalen Waddle should be playing this bad. And that's why I'm a little bit worried about buying him necessarily. And that's why I would say he's like a soft sell at this point in time. And then same goes for Terry McLaurin. I mean, he's 29 years old. He's not going to gain any more value. He's giving you great production, which is awesome, but he's valued as like a top 24 dynasty receiver right now. And I get that him and Jaden Daniels going to be tethered long-term, and that's all well and good. That's why he's moved up since where he was previously for me coming into the season. But are you telling me right now that Terry McLaurin can gain any more value than where he's already at? Like, Cooper Kupp and Mike Evans and all these guys, they produce similarly at the same age or maybe a little bit older, but they're not gaining any value. So why is Terry McLaurin gaining value? It's just because everybody assumes because he was drafted in 2019, he's super young when he's actually, going to be 30 next year. So that's the thing I worry about with Terry McLaurin. And then Ricky Pearsall, I mean, I haven't seen a whole lot to say that he's going to be a great player. So I think people are looking at the fact that maybe they trade Debo, maybe they trade Jennings, maybe they trade Ayuk, and they're kind of just projecting Ricky Pearsall to be this like future number 1 receiver, future number 2 receiver for Brock Purdy. And I'm just a little nervous that this continues to be like a crowded situation. And I haven't seen enough definitive evidence to say that Ricky Pearsall is this like stud that we need to be investing in right now. It's a little bit different than like Adonai Mitchell, for example, who on a pure like route run basis and like route by route basis, we've seen like great metrics from him. We haven't really seen that from Pearsall yet. So I'm a little bit hesitant to just like throw him as a top 36 dynasty wide receiver like Keep Trade Cut is doing. I have a little bit more trepidation about him because I also wasn't super high on him as a prospect, which also factors in a little bit. So the quarterback position, running backs, wide receivers, of course, took up the most of our time here. Quarterback buys in Superflex are so long-term focused, or at least that's how I view them, and I think that's how you guys should view them as well, than any other position. Most other positions, especially like running back and tight end, for example, are very focused and can skew very quickly based on what have you done for me lately, versus the quarterback position, in my opinion, should not be that way. It should be more, we think about long-term starter appeal. Ideally, we want quarterbacks who have big contracts, draft capital investment, the talent, obviously, to earn and keep down a starting job for the next 10 to 15 years, which is why, long-term starters are gold in Superflex, and that's why they're so valuable. Obviously, we also want to think about fantasy upside. Can they run? Ideally, if you're buying a contending quarterback, are they going to have like a good schedule? Do they project well for the stretch run? Or if you're a future, rebuilder type of quarterback that you're buying, what kind of fantasy upside value accumulation potential do they have? Like if you think about Drake May or JJ McCarthy, somebody that can move a little bit, who's a young quarterback, they have a lot of fantasy upside in the future, even if they're not giving you that right now. I mean, Drake May is kind of, but JJ McCarthy not playing right now. So all that stuff kind of factors in. But again, first and foremost, this guy needs to be starting games. Otherwise, he's useless to us as a fantasy quarterback. There's only one quarterback on the field at all times. And then also, too, value accumulation is something you need to think about when buying quarterbacks as well, because if you're going to buy a quarterback who immediately is going to lose value the second the season is over, that's not something that you probably want to do. And the example that comes to mind about a player like that is Sam Darnold, because Sam Darnold's starting right now. And if you buy him currently, you're probably paying more than what you'd pay for him in January. And I get that you're getting the production from him, but it's not needle-moving production, which is why I would consider him actually a sell rather than a buy, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the buys that I have listed here, you could see a couple of them are like value accumulators. Drake May, Trevor Lawrence is what I consider to be a value accumulator. Drake May, of course, young quarterback. I already have him at like 6, 7. That's where me and Danny have him ranked. The market still values him at like 11, and the reason for that is because he doesn't have any good weapons. He's not producing like elite level fantasy production, but he runs. He's going to get weapons upgrades in the offseason. So we're kind of projecting forward with where we have Drake May ranked. He's 22 years old. He was a great prospect. That's why we have him ranked where we do. Trevor Lawrence, it's like he's banged up right now. Maybe he plays at some point during this season for the rest of the year. They haven't officially said he's going to be done for the year, but maybe he's cooked for the season, and we're talking about projecting him going forward. It comes down to this. Trevor Lawrence, 25 years old. He has a huge contract. I still think he's one of the best 15 quarterbacks in the NFL. So that's why I'm buying him, and that's why I was buying him this offseason. Whereas some of the guys you have here, Patrick Mahomes, Tua Tagovailoa, I think are just down a little bit in market value right now. And the reason I'm buying them is because I think they project pretty decent as contending QB buys. And also people are a little bit hesitant about buying them because of I don't know why, to be honest. Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league. having a down season right now at 29 years old. There is very, very few other quarterbacks in the NFL I can say 10 years from now are probably still starting, and I think Patrick Mahomes is definitely one of them. So Patrick Mahomes, just people are valuing him as like QB 11, QB 12 on the market because he's not giving you great production, but we see blip on the radar production seasons for elite quarterbacks all the time, and I can confidently say still that most seasons going forward, Patrick Mahomes is going to be a top 6 redraft quarterback. So why are we treating him as if this season is what's going to happen for the rest of his career? Because in my opinion, it's just not. He's got a rookie receiver on one side. His best receiver tore his knee up and is going to potentially be suspended. He's got a 33-year-old as his number one target. I don't think that stuff is going to be constant going forward. So that's why I'm kind of buying Patrick Mahomes right now. And then Tua Tagovailoa, people are worried about concussions, and that's definitely fair. But to me, he's giving you good enough production that it's worth it. It's worth investing in that because he has a big contract. He's only 26 years old, and he's tethered to a great offensive mind with some good weapons. So for me, I think he's a good contending buy right now. If you guys need contending production, who's not going to if you had to send away like a first round pick for somebody right now, I would rather do it for Tua Tagovailoa as opposed to, Kirk Cousins or somebody that's like got a lot shorter of a shelf life in the NFL. And then Bryce Young and Will Levis, these guys are definitely really risky. So I understand if you were like, I'm not buying those guys. But the reason I'm potentially buying them, if I can get them for mid to late seconds, I would buy them. And the reason I say that is because this upcoming quarterback class is not great. So if we had, similar to what I said for the running backs, like an excellent 6 first-round quarterbacks class like we had last year, I would be a lot more worried that Bryce Young and Will Levis would lose their jobs. I still think probably one of them does. But at the same time, Carolina, if they can turn things on, Bryce Young's looked better as of late, maybe they roll with him for another year. Same goes with Will Levis. He's been looking a little bit better as of late. Maybe they roll with him for another year, and that's going to be worth mid to late second round production. So again, that's completely hinging on the quarterback class itself. But I do think Bryce Young and Will Levis, if they end up turning into franchise quarterbacks or at least close to franchise quarterbacks, they're going to accumulate a lot of value. It's risky, I understand it, but I'm actually still willing to buy into them, assuming the cost is a mid to late second round pick. Anything higher and I'd be selling, but a mid to late second round pick, I would be willing to buy, specifically Bryce Young, but maybe Will Levis as well. Quarterback sells that I'm going to talk about here. Again, these guys are just a case of being overvalued, either because the risk isn't baked in or because they project similarly to other players who are being valued lower than them. And that's the case with Jared Goff. I mean, Jared Goff should be valued similar to Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence, J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix. I mean, even Nix may be ahead of him at this point in time. But for some reason, Jared Goff is valued like way ahead of all those guys on the market right now. I get he plays for the Lions. They're a great team, but he's also 30 years old, and he has absolutely no value accumulation potential. Like, he's in the nuts right now. He's on the best offense in the NFL playing in Dan Campbell's scheme. He's got, efficient quarterback play out the wazoo, and he's still a low-end QB1. So I don't really know why Jared Goff would be valued higher than players who produce similarly to him in worse situations that could get better in the future, and they're also younger than him. So that's where I'm at with Jared Goff. To me, he's QB 20. He's the lowest part of that tier because he's the oldest, and that's pretty simple for me to understand and hopefully for you guys to understand. So that's where I'm at with Jared Goff. I think he's a little overvalued. Sam Darnold, like I said, a little bit overvalued just because people, for some reason, think he's going to be a starter for the Vikings next year. And it's like, okay, maybe Sam Darnold starts for somebody. Maybe he goes to the Giants. Maybe he goes to XYZ team. But I would put my money on him not being as good as he's been with the Vikings with any other team, because that's a great quarterback situation to be in. And honestly, Sam Darnold wasn't much before this season, and I don't think he'll be much after this season. And honestly, too, the last 5-6 games, he hasn't looked nearly as good as he was to start the year. So I think at the start of the year would probably have been the best time to sell him, but you still got a little bit of that remnants, sticking around in people's minds. So tight end position, I'll just rattle through this one really quickly. When you're buying tight ends, it's very similar to buying running backs. You're buying production typically at the tight end position, or you're buying like basement level value accumulators, hoping that you can hit on the next Trey McBride. That's kind of why I would buy a tight end. So if you're looking for production, I would highly suggest going big at tight end. Go big and go after Brock Bowers. Go big and go after Sam Laporta, who's on the low right now. Go big and go after David Njoku. These guys are going to give you great production. Obviously, they're going to cost you a variety of different costs, but I do think that's the way to go at tight end. because it feels like a very top-heavy position around the NFL in general. Or, like I said, if you want to buy a value accumulator tight end, like a Jatavian Sanders, only 21 years old, already won the starting job for his young, potentially flourishing offense in the future, that's the type of guy that could turn into the next Trey McBride and suddenly become a top 5 dynasty tight end a year from now. That's the type of buy that I would go after if you're a rebuilder, a one-year punt type of situation. You could probably get Jatavian Sanders for a late second rounder or cheaper, and that's why I would buy somebody like that. Noah Fant, Greg Dulcich, maybe they move on to new teams or something like that. They're very cheap options, like low, 15th, 17th, 18th, 19th round startup picks. That's why I would go after guys like that, but generally speaking, they're probably just not that great. And then the sells at the tight end position is just that their market value is too high. And to me, Cade Otton and Dalton Kincaid's market values are too high right now. I love Cade Otton. He's 25 years old. He's in his 3rd NFL season. He's producing as a top 5 option right now. But the problem with Cade Otton is that they've talked about replacing him. They've talked about how he's not like the biggest needle mover in this tight end core. So that's the thing I'd be worried about with Cade Otton into the future. Obviously, rest of the season, he's going to be great, but that's the thing I'd be worried about. And then Dalton Kincaid, conversely, I could put Cade Otton's production on Dalton Kincaid. He'd be like tight end 3 in Dynasty right now. But the problem is he's not producing, and he's in an ideal situation to produce. So that makes me think that Dalton Kincaid just might not be that good. So that's the issue that I have with Kincaid right now. Everything peripherally is great for him, except for his own production and his own play right now. So that's the thing I worried about with Dalton Kincaid. He's 25 years old. I get he's only in his 2nd NFL season, but Kyle Pitts is a full year younger than him in his 4th NFL season. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a little worried that Dalton Kincaid should be better than he is right now and just isn't. Maybe he's a slow producer, a slow burn. It took him a long time to get acclimated in college. Maybe it'll take him, David Njoku type of career path to get acclimated into the NFL. But the tight end position is volatile in the open market, man. If Dalton Kincaid comes out and produces the rest of the way how he's producing right now, how low does he sink in dynasty value? And then next year, if he comes out and he's not producing right away, how low does he sink in value? Like, that's the thing I worry about with Dalton Kincaid versus, some other guys who are a little bit younger. If he was in his 2nd season, he was 22 years old or 23 years old, there'd be a little bit more leeway there. Whereas because he was an older prospect and a 1st round pick, there's all these expectations on him from the open market and how high he was valued coming into the season, and that's the thing that I worry about with him. So this was like obviously all over the place. Hopefully you guys followed. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast. I know a lot of people tell me that, but I gave you a lot of strategy in this video, how I would attack certain positions, how I would attack certain players. If you're a rebuilder, what you should be doing at each position. If you're a contender, what you should be doing at each position, so on and so forth. So if you guys got some value from this, leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here. Again, our Dynasty trade value chart, which is where I took all this information from, is live and fully updated with both mine and Danny's Dynasty rankings in there. You could see the ages, how we would, classify their values based on a variety of different scoring formats. That is available over on flockfantasy.com. When you sign up, use the promo code FSE. Sign up for a 7-day free trial to get started, see what's all available on the site, and then maybe decide that it's worth your money or not. Promo code FSE gets you 30% off, 6 months for free on an annual sign up. And when you sign up annually for the highest package, the Mother Flocker tier, you also get a free team review so that I can look at your Dynasty team or Danny can look at your Dynasty team, advise you moves based on, you load your team into our free My Teams feature and we can see your entire league. So we can say, hey, this guy maybe doesn't need this player. You should go and inquire about this player. Or you need this position. You could go ask these 3 managers how that would work. So it's kind of like a personalized piece of advice, way more value than you can get from like a simple YouTube comment where you can only say so much context before it's like a huge comment and so on and so forth. So if that interests you, again, team reviews are a very, very awesome feature of our site. You can go check those out. You can also just purchase those outright if you don't want to sign up for a subscription, but highly encourage you to sign up for an annual because you get one for free and it saves you a lot of money that way. So definitely check that out if you're interested. All of our Dynasty rankings are up to date. We got a 2025 prospect talk video that we did about a week and a half ago talking about how strong the running back class is, quarterback classes, wide receiver classes, so on and so forth, giving in-depth analysis on how their seasons are going. So if you're a Dynasty player, I'm sure that will definitely interest you. So definitely check that out also if you are interested. Link down below in the pinned comment. But with that being said, peace out. We'll talk to you soon.